We interrupt the 25th Anniversary Essence Awards to bring you the following Fox News special. The Essence Awards will continue in its entirety immediately following this special.
This is a Fox News special report.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Tracy Neal in the Fox studios in Washington. In just a few moments, President Bill Clinton will go before a national TV audience to unveil new plans to balance the federal budget within a decade. The president's original budget, which was submitted to Congress in January, called for deficits in the $200 billion range, well into the next century. But on Capitol Hill, the Republican leadership is on its way to approving a plan that would balance the budget within 7 years, in part by making sharp cuts in many of the programs Mr. Clinton and Democrats want to maintain. Senate Majority Leader Bob Dole will speak following the president's address tonight. And now, from the White House, the President of the United States on his plan to reduce the nation's debt.
Good evening. Tonight I present to the American people a plan for a balanced federal budget. My plan cuts spending by $1.1 trillion. It does not raise taxes. It won't be easy, but elected leaders of both parties agree with me that we must do this, and we will. We're at the edge of a new century, living in a period of rapid and profound change, and we must do everything in our power to help our people build good and decent lives for themselves and their children. These days, working people can't keep up, no matter how hard they work, 1, 2, even 3 jobs. Without the education to get good jobs, they can't make it in today's America. I don't want my daughter's generation to be the first generation of Americans to do worse than their parents. Now, balancing our budget can help to change that if we do it in a way that reflects our values and what we care about the most, our children, our families, and what we leave to generations to come. That's why my budget has 5 fundamental priorities. First, because our most important mission is to help people make the most of their own lives, don't cut education. Second, balance the budget by controlling health care costs, strengthening Medicare and saving Medicaid, not by slashing health services for the elderly. Third, cut taxes for the middle class and not the wealthy. We shouldn't cut education or Medicare just to make room for a tax cut for people who don't really need it. Fourth, cut welfare, but save enough to protect children and move able-bodied people from welfare to work. Fifth, don't put the brakes on so fast that we risk our economic prosperity. This can be a turning point for us. For 12 years, our government, Congress, and the White House ducked the deficit and pretended we could get something for nothing. In my first 2 years as president, we turned this around and cut the deficit by 1/3. Now let's eliminate it. It's time to clean up this mess. Here's how. First, I propose to cut spending in discretionary areas other than defense by an average of 20%, except education. I want to increase education, not cut it. We'll continue to cut waste. Under Vice President Gore's leadership, we're already cutting hundreds of programs and thousands of regulations and 270,000 federal positions. We'll still be able to protect the environment and invest in technology and medical research for things like breast cancer and AIDS. But make no mistake, in other areas, there will be big cuts, and they'll hurt. Second, we should limit tax cuts to middle-income people, not upper-income people, and target the tax cuts to help Americans pay for college, like we did with the GI Bill after World War II. Let's help a whole new generation of Americans go to college. That's the way to make more Americans upper-income people in the future. Third, don't cut Medicare services to the elderly. Instead of cutting benefits, maintain them by lowering costs. Crack down on fraud and abuse. Provide more home care. Programs. For all Americans, I propose the freedom to take your insurance with you when you change jobs, to keep it longer after you lose a job. Insurance coverage even if there are pre-existing conditions in your family, and lower cost insurance for groups of self-employed and small business people. If we don't have tax cuts for upper income people, as congressional leaders have proposed, we won't need to make harsh cuts in health care or in education. Finally, balance the budget in 10 years. It took decades to run up this deficit. It's going to take a decade to wipe it out. Now, mind you, we could do it in 7 years, as congressional leaders propose. But the pain we'd inflict on our elderly, our students, and our economy just isn't worth it. My plan will cut the deficit year after year. It will balance the budget without hurting our future. This budget proposal is very different from the two passed by the House and the Senate. And there are fundamental differences between Democrats and Republicans about how to balance the budget. But this debate must go beyond partisanship. It must be about what's good for America and which approach is more likely to bring prosperity and security to our people over the long run. We ought to approach it in the same spirit of openness and civility which we felt when the Speaker and I talked in New Hampshire last Sunday. There are those who have suggested that it might actually benefit one side or the other politically if we had gridlock and ended this fiscal year without a budget. But that would be bad for our country, and we have to do everything we can to avoid it. If we'll just do what's best for our children, our future, and our nation, and forget about who gets the political advantage, we won't go wrong. Good night. Let's get to work.
That, of course, was President Bill Clinton outlining a brief address from the White House tonight. Proposals to slow the growth of Medicare and Medicaid and welfare spending, and to change the status of some business tax breaks and subsidies. The president has said he wanted a $60 billion tax cut for middle-class Americans, and he is apparently sticking by that plan. He spoke in general terms. We can talk specifics now. In Medicare, Mr. Clinton is proposing cuts in spending by about $130 billion over the next 10 years. Medicaid spending would be cut by $55 billion. Mr. Clinton is proposing cuts in welfare of $35 billion over the next 10 years. He wants to eliminate as much as $25 billion in tax breaks and subsidies that many businesses currently qualify for. The president has referred to those programs in the past as corporate welfare. Mr. Clinton says his plan would keep many of the education, job training, and child care programs currently receiving federal funding. But the problem for the president is how to reconcile this plan with what Congress is proposing to do. The 7-year deficit reduction plan that Republicans in the House and Senate support calls for cuts in many of the same programs Mr. Clinton just outlined for us tonight. But they are much deeper and much broader. The GOP wants nearly twice as much money cut from Medicare and from welfare. And they say the president is simply playing politics with his plan. They say Mr. Clinton sees a fast-moving train leaving town and he is simply trying to catch up. But Mr. Clinton calls the Republican plan a train wreck for the nation. Both sides are hoping to convince the American public that their way is the best way as the budget deficit heads to a critical stage. Speaking on behalf of Republicans tonight is Senator Robert Dole from Kansas, the majority leader of the Republican Party. Let's go to Senator Dole now.
Good evening. I'm Bob Dole, the Senate Majority Leader. I'd like to offer a few thoughts in response to the President on behalf of the Republicans in Congress and around the country and the millions of Americans who have waited so long for their leaders to rein in our runaway government. As I told the President when we spoke earlier this evening, there can be no higher priority for America and the future of our children than to balance the federal budget. Since you gave Republicans control of the Congress last November, I have known a balanced budget was at last within reach, but we have lacked the necessary partnership with the President of the United States. Tonight, I believe nothing can stop us. The will of the people, Republican majorities in both houses, and now the willingness of the President to act have converged into a moment of powerful potential. This is a moment we must seize, or forever bear the judgment of history. But I also offer a word of caution about what the President is saying. As I listened to him tonight, I was concerned to still hear a defense of the status quo, recycle reasons why big government cannot become smaller, why programs cannot be cut, and why agencies cannot be eliminated. As government has grown bigger, the plight of poor Americans has grown steadily worse. We have mortgaged our children's future to pay for incompetence and decay. Why can't we return broad power and money to our states, our cities, our school districts, and our communities, and expect all Americans to be better off? We must not be so afraid of change that we cling to failure. And while we Republicans accept with enthusiasm the President's offer to work with us on a balanced budget, my caution is this: the American people are fed up with politics as usual. Strategies to engender fear and to pit class of Americans against each other will not be tolerated. The will of the people cannot be denied, and we will not participate in any attempt to do so. Coming to agreement will not be easy. We Republicans have strong philosophical disagreements with the President. When President Clinton sent us his budget just 4 months ago, it contained no plan to achieve balance even in the future. In fact, the President proposed increasing the deficit by $1.2 trillion over the next 5 years. President Clinton's plan was defeated in the Senate by a vote of 99-0. Republicans were then forced to act on our own. We passed bills in both the House and the Senate to achieve a balanced budget by the year 2002. And those bills outline our philosophies and priorities. First, the Republican Congress has already demonstrated that we can cut the budget, balance the budget, and cut taxes for working families at the same time. Our tax cuts, by the way, serve two purposes. They reduce the government's take of the people's wages, a goal worthy unto itself, but when also matched by cuts in government spending, as they are in the Republican budget bills, they have the added benefit of further limiting the sprawling growth of government that smothers our chances for long-term prosperity. Second, we have taken Social Security out of discussion. It is off the table. It will not be touched. And third, we've offered a commitment to preserve, improve, and protect Medicare, a program teetering on the edge of bankruptcy, according to 3 members of the President's own cabinet. Let me be clear. Medicare is a legitimate function of government on which many millions of our citizens rely. We must save it, and we will. Now, as I said before, Republicans have already produced a strategy to balance the budget. Our budget is distinguished between what is nice and what is necessary, between a handout and a hand-up, between redistribution of wealth and return to the principles that created the American dream. We believe we have outlined a path to prosperity Americans can rely on well into the next century. But tonight, with the President's entry into the process, a long-awaited national discussion finally begins in earnest. I invite the American people to listen closely. We're about to conduct a debate of historic proportions about the strength of our spirit and the character of our nation. The choices are fear or hope, dependence or self-reliance, more government or less. May God help us act with a faith in freedom and an unwavering trust in the American people. Thank you and good night.
That was Senate Majority Leader Robert Dole outlining his party's ideas for balancing the nation's budget. In summary now, the president seems to be saying slower is better, while the Republicans believe the president's plan is too little too late. For all of us here at Fox News in Washington, I'm Tracy Neal. Good night.
This has been a Fox News special report.
I'll continue with the 25th Anniversary Essence Awards in its entirety.